Thank you, Kathy. I don't know where you're standing right now. There you are, back there. It is really a privilege to talk to a large group of women, particularly about the topic of nutrition and genetics. So I'm very grateful to be here, and I've always been told not to apologize for anything, but the slides I think I saw from the back, they're a little faint, but most of what I'm about to say um, is verbal, and I hope we have lots of questions about this topic too. So we almost met in December, and in December there were the fires here and where I live, because I live way over in Oxnard. So I had several people living at my house. I have several friends who lost homes. Um, I think we're still recovering, but during that time I saw a lot of kindness and generosity in the Santa Paula, Oxnard, Ventura communities. It was pretty profound. And picture, you may not see the glowing lava in this picture, but here we are back with fire and lava in Hawaii. And both my nephews today, my one nephew lost his house yesterday. The lava covered it. I know, I'm trying not to cry. And they're 34 and 36. And he had a baby about 6 months ago. And the other nephew lives up the road from him and is, going to lose his home as well. They're pretty brave. 3 days ago, they were let in to get their belongings. And you always wonder, what are you going to get if your home's going to be covered by lava? Well, my one nephew's a mechanic, and he chose his generator and his tools. I said, did you get any clothes? No, okay, My other nephew had 3 truckloads. Everything in his house came out. So it's very fascinating what we hold near and dear, but absolutely how we take care of each other is the most important. And coming from a very large family, it's been amazing to see my siblings just say, we'll build you a new house, whatever. So back to the fire. So I brought that with me. I think I have to move these along this way. Let's see. So our topic today is complex, and I will challenge you probably a bit with terminology, mostly. But I think I repeat myself so often, but by the end you're like, if she says that one more time, it'll be in your head when you walk out. So the topic today really is about the focus. So there's a lot going on with our genes. There's a lot going on with data that we're collecting. We're learning where we came from. We see the TV commercials about where we came from. But what we're going to focus on today is the role of diet, what we consume, and then the difference between diet and nutrition is what happens once you consume the food and how it's metabolized. So nutrition is food that's metabolized. And that's always confusing because people relate nutrition and health as the same. And they're not, actually. Nutrition is just a part of your health and what's going on. So we'll look at nutrition and the genes and look to see to a new topic called nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. Oh, sorry, I have a disclaimer. So I've spent 25 years at Pepperdine, coming from Northern California. And I remember being so resistant. I don't want to live in Southern California. I'm a Northern California girl. And from the moment I stepped on Pepperdine campus, I'm like, oh, I hope they keep me. And so I feel very humbled. It's fun that Susan's here today because we've had our own walk together with her own daughter and now a granddaughter. So it's just been a lovely journey. And then, but my disclaimer is, a year ago, I was asked to be part of a startup called Silverberry Genomics. And it's one of the companies that's looking at all of your SNP data that we'll talk about. And it's a company that asks if you want to share your data from 23andMe or MyAncestry.com or Heritage or Habit. They will ask for that information. They offer an array of services. Help with your skin, help with your diet. They have a whole array, but that's really their gift because what they really want is your data, because that's what they're they're mining is your data. And so I was asked, because I chair the Institutional Review Board for Human Subjects Research at Pepperdine, and they needed an ethical approach to take your information and use it confidentially and anonymously in order to use artificial intelligence to cluster patterns all over the world of disease. And we're going to keep talking about that during this talk. And I thought, wow, what a privilege that I get to walk into a company that's actually looking to prevent disease. And this came about because my current research is looking at folic acid deficiency and supplementation on Down syndrome and Alzheimer's. So I started in Down syndrome. So my passion really is looking at folic acid deficiency and Down syndrome. However, I learned in this process that the brain of the Down syndrome individual looks identical to the Alzheimer's brain. Isn't that fascinating? It's fascinating. So there's a lot of commonalities. And so right now I'm actually doing an Alzheimer's study, but it's really going to tell me a lot about my Down syndrome individual. So there's a lot of, and it's collaborative. Right now I have 8 students working with me, several outside researchers. You can't do it alone. So we're going to talk about the process of how complex this area is. So this is why, and why it's important for you to understand this. I think the area of the human or the conversation of the human genome can't take off until our public understands the terminology, because we won't talk about it. GMOs came out in the 70s, and we're just now feeling comfortable having conversations about GMO, right? We actually know what a GMO is. We have avid debates about GMO, and that was 30, 40 years ago. But part of it is educating with that language. So this area that we're going to look at today affects, you know, what Grandma and Grandpa ate, sorry, Susan, affects their grandchildren. And so I'm going to share with you two recent studies that show that epigenetic effect, in particular with diet. And that is makes us all more responsible about what we put in our mouth, right, and what we choose to eat. And currently working with college freshmen. In the last 2 years, I have a nutrition class that starts with just freshmen, and we take food. I ask them to choose their favorite meal or a meal that they think is healthy. Could be either one. Those may not be synonymous. They aren't for me. And then we analyze it. We look at fat content, protein content, carbohydrate, their vitamins and their minerals. So they get to learn, and they write a nutrition label at the end. So it's a really fun freshman lab. But it sort of stunned me 2 years ago that more than half of them chose a protein bar to analyze, and that was their meal. So they think of food, they think of a protein bar as a meal. That's not good, right? And then this year, my class chose, interestingly, and it was really expensive, so I'm not going to allow it this year. They chose smoothies. And in their smoothies, they put all kinds of supplements, bee pollen. I think there was lilac flower. It took us a couple of weeks to find some of the ingredients that they wanted to put in, and they were somewhat expensive. It's not sustainable to live with that type of concept that good nutrition comes in a smoothie, right, with all of these ingredients added into it. It sort of takes us back. So another disclaimer, I really believe in eating food, right? Really believe, I stand here unashamed. No, really, food is food. So, and I feel like we've gone this cycle, and now I have to deconstruct these kids to learn that we have to eat regular food. Eat the orange, not the Jamba Juice, right? That sort of thing. So what we put in our mouth affects all of us, and we need to care for one another. All right, my hope for today is that you will learn about nutrigenomics. You will go out of this talk hopefully very wise about nutrigenomics. I'm going to use a lot of the language, explain a lot of the language of diet, nutrition, and genes, and I'm going to address the concept of personalized nutrition. So how do we arrive? It's like personalized medicine, but in this case, it would be using diet as a form of prevention. And are we there yet? And can we actually, with an evidence-based confidence, give you a recommendation for you to change your life and your diet? And that's personalized nutrition. So that's the topic we're gonna get to. But first, can anyone see that with the black and white? Can you see that from back there? I'll just talk about it. I know. So these are my prompts. I'll look at my slide. And the ironic thing is I never use PowerPoint when I teach. It's ironic that I'm using it today because I normally talk from the board, talk from my notes. But nutrigenomics is the overarching field. And it's really looking at the human genome data. It's looking at that data. It's strictly looking at that gene data. Nutrigenetics is looking at that DNA and how it might change or mutate in response to your diet or in response to something in your diet, whether it's a nutrient or whether it's turmeric or caffeine or trying to think of other, or the lilac flower. But anything, any bioactive chemical that's put into the diet, so any kind of supplement in addition to your nutrients, that's the area of nutrigenetics. You're looking at that impact of that item on the gene. So it's a subcategory of nutrigenomics. It's a huge area, right? So I wanted you to appreciate that. My interest is the epigenomic area. So the epigenetic area, the nutrition epigenetic area. And that is how that gene that mutates gets transcribed to something surprising, maybe. An example of that would be growing up in a fair-skinned family. I don't look fair-skinned right now. I think I've been in the sun a lot because I was at a horse show last week. But being in a fair-skinned family, I have the MCR1 gene for the melanin that can cause skin cancer. Will that express itself? I surely hope not. I have it, but I hope it doesn't express itself, and I can help myself by maybe not being out in the sun so much, right? By wearing my SPF. So that's an example of something. We also are understanding that's MCR1 is a melanocortin pathway, and I'm going to come back to that pathway with another genetic issue with binge eating, an eating disorder. I'm going to come back to that. Same receptor, different mutation, different phenotype comes out. So it's really an interesting area. And of course, because I love food and I love studying diet, I love studying nutrition, that's the area I think is very powerful to study, because I do think a lot of our current diseases may have what's down here. You can't see that, but as we go down the omic pathway, eventually you want to be able to have a therapeutic treatment, right? How can we provide a good, optimal therapeutic outcome? So, next slide. So just to reiterate, nutrigenomics is the study of the gene and how the gene gets expressed or regulated differently depending upon what's in your diet. It's a good thing you can't really see this slide. This is the kind of slide where you want your students to sit up straight and realize they have a lot of work to do, right? I put this slide up as a reminder to share with you that there are just thousands and thousands of researchers working on this topic. Just in the area of nutrition, there are. But the genomic area is just a worldwide collaboration, and it requires a wide variety of scientists. It requires a wide variety of participation by the public in order to understand the field. So in order to even run a study, you need several parts to be looking. So because that's maybe not humanly possible, quite a few computer-assisted programs are developed and have been developed. And there's international programs, there's our programs at several institutions here, sort of competing a little bit to see where they can get and how far they can get with a novel approach for treatment. So here's my 3 questions for today for nutrigenomics. Can we determine individual nutritional requirements based on your genetic makeup? Can we do that? The promise is out there. The promise is in all of those companies promising that if you analyze your data, they can tell you whether you can even have coffee or not, whether you should have an egg or not, cholesterol or not, whether you should, how much fat you should be consuming, whether you require high protein or not. That's what they're aiming for. The second question, which is where I'm highly interested in, is there a strong association with chronic disease? So I'm going to share some research with you that shows the impact of the mother in late gestation and what she's exposed to and how that affects her offspring. And it doesn't affect that offspring until later adolescence. So it doesn't show up until later adolescence. So that's hard to really screen for, right? Right now we screen for around 60 different diseases at birth. These are later phenotypic expressions that come out in adolescence and adulthood. And we know this, and we know this intuitively because we're not a healthy society. We know that with all the gifts here in the United States, we should be healthier than we are. We know that. So it'll be fun to learn and understand how to prevent that. The very last thing is I think it's very important to ask and identify genes that we can, that respond to diet and that we can inhibit, control, regulate to prevent that so that we can prevent the chronic disease from going further and harming us. Okay. So one of the main pieces of information that you have available to you right now is called SNP data. Have you heard of SNP data? SNP, SNP data. So when you fill out your form for 23andMe or MyHeritage or some of these companies that are gathering your information, they're actually searching for your SNP data, which is, right now, I'm going to define it and then I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's a single nucleotide polymorphism. Mouthful. In short, it's a SNP without the I, SNP data. And it's a little sequence on your gene that can make all the difference in the world. All the difference in the world. Very small. Typically, they're single nucleotide changes, right? They're one nucleotide. So going back to your biology days, the nucleotide is on the DNA, and they're adenine, guanine, does that ring a bell? Cytosine, thymine, no. Anyway, they're single nucleotides, easy to measure. We can measure these. So this is why there's a fascination right now, and there's a lot of businesses associated with this, is we can measure thousands of SNPs. And we have about 60 diseases that are well researched that we can attach to those SNPs, right? So that we can attach that information to. What we do with it, we don't know yet. Okay, we really don't know yet. There's a lot of promise and hope out there, but we don't know yet. So a little bit further on the SNP. I think an easy way to think of it is that it's just a small change. It's just a small change in your gene. So an example of it would be Well, I've given here several examples, and I want to, let me go to this next slide. Can't really see that. To put it in perspective, we have 3 to 3.5 billion base pairs in our genome. Huge number. So we're looking at one of those changing. So a SNP is a single change in one of those. Okay. What we do know is that among humans, and this is fascinating, and I hope if there's anything you take home from today, you remember this, because this will ground you when you have those conversations with passionate, no, don't drink coffee. You know, your SNP profile says you shouldn't drink coffee, right? Right? We all get really involved with a little bit of information, right? We do. I do that. But there's the SNPs that we know, that we have found, are averaging in the population between 35,000. So I might have 35,000 SNPs to 10 million. So I might have 10 million SNPs. So I have 6 brothers and sisters. My siblings could have 1 million SNP changes, 3 million, 40, right? We all have a different number of SNPs. We're not better. More is not better. It's how lethal is that SNP, right? So I could have 10 million SNPs, be perfectly healthy till I'm 100 years old. Nothing ever happening to me. And that's what we're trying to figure out. Why is it that some people have a lot of SNPs, but they are perfectly healthy for their entire life? How does that happen, right? I find myself a lot following people who are 100, the centenarians, and anyone. We just had a few people, I think it was in Japan, that were 119, and then she died, and then someone else became, in Japan, the oldest person. I find that fascinating, and I always look, because of my area, like, what did they eat? And it always comes at the very end of their obituary or the story on them. They talk a lot about their life. A lot of it is their social relationships. They're happy people. They wake up in the morning with a bright look on the day, with a hopeful outlook. Has nothing to do with diet, right? When you read all about their life, and then you get to the very end, which is what I'm looking for, which is, what did they eat? Do they have the answer? You know, do they have it? It's across the board. You know, some of them will have had donuts every day of their life. You know, every day I go to the donut store and I eat a glaze, 3 glaze, you know, whatever they're eating, you're like, oh, well, that's kind of a letdown, because that negates my entire field. You know, I don't really want to know that, right? But so I've done this for years, and there is no pattern to what people eat, right? There is no pattern, which then leads to, well, we are all very different. We are all very, very different. And this knowledge tells us we're very different. We don't all have the same number of SNPs. Huge variance, yes. 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 Yep. You can find that information out. It should have it on your report. Well, they're giving you the percent of their total. So it should be on that report. But I would have to look. I have not done 23andMe. I've done habit. I was curious about habit. But it should give you that total number. And if not, you can call and ask them. It's your information. Yeah. But here's the essence of that. I could have 35,000, say, in my siblings, because we're a really competitive family about everything. And I could say, I only have 35,000. I'm healthiest, you know, even though I ate wheat thins every day for 10 years, I'm healthiest. But I could have a SNP for sickle cell, and it could kill me, right? And my other sibling with 10 million may not have that SNP. So that's also that variation in it. Okay. Can't read these, but I'm going to read. Yes. No. That's the one exception. That's the identical twins is what we use to compare against everything else. You have identical twins? Yeah. Their SNPs will show up mirrored. Yeah, my father's an identical twin. Fascinatingly, and they showed up. They're both doctors. One's in neuroscience, one's in GP. I mean, and they're our hope. That's unusual. Yeah. And you're a twin too? Yeah. Well, that's your twins, whether they want to or not, maybe will be part of a control in a study at some point, right? Yeah, it's very important. I was at a horse. It's called Drill Team. My son rides with 17 other riders to music. It's like synchronized horseback riding. It's kind of crazy, and they all ride to music and compete. And so you sit around a lot because you get there on a Thursday to get the horses ready, and they don't compete till Sunday, and they compete for 8 minutes. You know, that's so you have a lot of time with the other parents, a lot of time. And I was telling them about this talk, and I was teaching them, I was practicing on them about SNP information. And one of them told me this really kind of tear-jerking story about they had a family reunion last summer. And it was her husband found out he had a daughter that was 30 years old from kind of like the Golden Gate Killer. You know how they found him? They found this daughter that he didn't know about, and she found him because they matched their DNA, because you can sign whether you want that or not. But if you want that, they found this daughter. And this daughter, they invited her to the family reunion. They have a huge family. And she just cried the whole time because she'd been raised by the single mother, and her mother had died. And so they reached out to the birth mom, and the birth mom didn't want anything to do with it because she had, a long time ago, didn't tell anybody she had a baby, right? So they're trying, it's going to be probably a process. But think of the joy coming to all those people. So it was just, we were all crying listening to, and that was just from doing a 23andMe type process. It's pretty exciting. So there's lots of things going on with 23andMe. Finding relatives, and maybe sometimes you don't want to find those relatives. Someone coming to your door, you're like, who are you? No, you can't have, no. Okay, so here's things in this field of study that were really, that are used as a guidepost. One is that improper diets are risks for disease. We know that. We still aren't decided on what is a improper diet. So Susan Gibney and I were talking. Her granddaughter and I are in a heated discussion because I told her I wasn't sure God created vegans. I love to challenge the students. And we talked about the pathway of a vegetarian and a vegan, and what does that mean? And so I like to challenge them because these are 18, 19-year-olds, right? And you want them to think why they are, not why their family made them one, or why they're, how they came to be. And so I shared with the class because they're still in early stages of learning about nutrition. And we have, at the very last day, we have a heated discussion about veganism, vegetarianism, our recent carnivores, our high-protein individuals, right? So we have the carnivores amidst us right now, and then the omnivore. And I told her, I said, here's where I stand on this. I'm almost certain that the majority of us probably are going to prevent chronic disease if we eat a little bit of plant and animal. Not one way or the other. But I have seen enough evidence, having grown up with a general practitioner. There were several people in my small town that came up with cancers. And once that person says, I don't want treatment anymore from the doctor, this was a long time ago, they had to quit the treatment, the Western medicine treatment. And so several of these people went down to Mexico and went to clinics that were fully plant-based. And I know two that are still living. I don't think it's a miracle. I think that probably they're a plant-based diet individual. I think they're a plant-based diet. Others didn't come back and didn't live, right? So I do think that there are some of us who are absolutely going to inhibit that expression of that SNP, that gene, by a purely plant-based diet. Yes. Sure. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that ties into exactly what I'm talking about right now. Absolutely. So I think on the flip side, I think, we have a lot of CrossFit people, and CrossFit believes in a really high protein diet. They're probably more of our carnivores. And they probably do better on that high protein diet. But not everybody does well on that high protein diet. So you can cause disease in the between. And that's where I hope we get to understanding which diet is good for you. So I think you could be a CrossFit person and be a vegan, right? Plant-based diet, or an omnivore. You could be anything. Yes. Right. 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 It. Right. Oh yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Right. Well, I think you're very in tune with your body. I don't think the general population is. And I think part of that starts. Ellen Satter, at one point, was sort of the appointed national child nutritionist. She's written several books on child nutrition. And what she always talks about is, from a very young age, you should let your child choose what they want to eat. From the time they say, "I'm hungry," you should say, and you should have food out for them to choose, rather than dictating what you think they should eat and how much you should think, and when they should eat. They should be following, because I think we erase that awareness at a very young age. And so a lot of us come later in life to, oh, I feel so much better when I eat high. Keto diet has helped a lot of people. The high-fat diet has helped a lot of people. That's another diet, and recent evidence just came out that may be protective of heart disease. What is the irony of that? That high fat is high saturated fat, my favorite kind of fat, right? My cheesecake is going to help my heart, right? I do, and I was gonna bring that up, because that's been a little bit of the criticism and the confusion, because the public is confusing blood work and genetic data, and that's the confusion. So some of these companies are taking saliva for the genes. Some are taking blood, but they're really looking at these immunoglobulins. They're looking at blood glucose. They're looking at other factors to help you look at how you're going to regulate your blood glucose. And that may be high fat or high protein or high carbohydrate. Depends. Does that make sense? So that is absolutely helpful. Yeah. Blood type. So the blood type diet came out 80s, around in the 1980s. And I think some of the blood type diet was probably written hopefully. I've read it so many times as a book that our students read. They always read a popular diet book. But at the heart of it, I think it's the truest book in the sense that the blood type separates all of us into different genetic category, a different type of genetic category. And I do think there was a little bit of randomness of how they chose the foods for each blood type. Because remember, within that blood type, you're going to have different SNPs. And so a little bit of it doesn't work because of that difference, because you're mixing, again, the blood data, the biochemical data with the genetic data. I think we do then, but I think now if you revisited that concept, you would start to see greater patterns, but there'd be subcategories. There wouldn't be one diet for type O, right, or AB. There would be, right. But I've had also many individuals who follow. I have some here in Malibu, a couple. They both follow their blood type. They have, since I've known them, 25 years they followed it, and they both have maintained really good health. So there is some truth to that, right? So, and whoever wrote the book, I can't remember the author, was following patterns, probably an MD, because he was following patterns of what he saw in his patient, the observation. So he was making that type of, and that was helpful. Yeah, so I do think there's some, that the blood type diet is what first gave me the thought that we all are probably, kind of as we were spread out all over the world, I think that we all have, we're either, this vegetarian, this herbivore, or whether this carnivore, but most of us are that omnivore, right? And that's what we have to figure out and get in touch with instead of listening to someone else tell us what to eat. We have to start being in charge of what we eat that makes us, like what you're talking about. What makes you feel good and what makes you feel better. Okay, so I'm going to move on. How are we on time? I can't see the time. Okay, good. All right. So here's a lot of these companies. They're making a lot of money. I think I like the companies right now. Maybe I don't like the companies that are promising treatment. I like the companies that are building knowledge, that are building awareness, that are educating us. I'm not so sure I like someone promising you something that may or may not work. Not sure I find that very ethical. The range is $50 to $2,000 on some of these tests. There's a Mother's Day special. There's always a special. So you can always get them for half the price. If you wait for a holiday, there's always a special on them. On average, they cost about $199 to $299. Really valuable information about your heritage, about just your ancestry, your potential for certain diseases. The most controversial one that just came up is the habit. So I went ahead and sent some stuff into the habit. That's the one that's been in the news the last month. And where they got in trouble is they were sending out information, but not explaining it clearly. They weren't inaccurate in what they were sending out, but they were not full disclosure to their clients, right? So they were taking information primarily off blood glucose data, and they were telling people whether they should have a high-fat diet or a high-protein diet, low protein, whether they need to have more or less fat. But they were basing it on their blood glucose, not their genetic data. But the individuals were spreading the word that there's this new company that can test your genes and they can figure your diet out. Wouldn't that be magic? And so they were called out on it. They were called out on that type of behavior. You want both information, so their intent was pure, but just explanation to the public. Part of that is still, I think, our public still is confused with what is genetic DNA and what is biochemical metabolites in the blood from your diet. So there's still a confusion between those two. And so that still needs to be, of course, all the way down to our grade schools, we need to be learning about that, right? So that we're an educated public and we can help solve this big puzzle. And I just mentioned here that they take all kinds of body parts from you: saliva, blood, tissue cells, anything you're willing to give. um, so the study I'm doing right now, my students are amazed at all the tissues that we have to take. And for the first time, so 2 years ago, we looked at a study of folic acid deficiency in Down syndrome mice. And lo and behold, we found that folic acid deficiency shortened the nerve by 50%. And these were old Down syndrome mice. So we were looking at the older mouse, 50%. So that was pretty significant. It was pretty simply designed. It was my first step back into kind of metabolic research. And so we collected a lot of data in order to confirm we had folic acid deficiency. Dr. David Green, one of our chemists at Pepperdine, his student measured homocysteine for me. And we all know homocysteine, right, in heart disease. No? Okay, so I'm going to step back. Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. It's a vitamin. It's a water-soluble vitamin. And about 40, 50 years ago, down in Mexico, there were a lot of babies born without brains, or partial brains, hemibrains. And they connected it with, I think it's the Rio Grande that goes through there below Texas. And they just along that area were a lot of manufacturing industry, a lot of companies, and they were putting their waste out into the water. And they figured out that there was an antagonist molecule that looked really similar to folic acid. And it was preventing the neural development of the brain and the spine. So it was causing spina bifida. Direct cause. So long time ago, they confirmed that in animal studies. So we now know how to prevent spina bifida, right? We know that if the mother consumes adequate folic acid in the diet, they'll have a baby with a brain, right? The other inhibitor of folic acid is alcohol. All this guilt. I'll share this with you. My dad died of prostate cancer, and you never think someone's going to die. It was heartbreaking. He was just everything to me. And he waited until he had 6 months to live to tell all 7 of us. And so I was pretty much at the house as often as I could be. And I know the last 2 months of his life, I think my mom and I shared a bottle of wine every single night. She had 2 glasses. I was with her every night. We'd just sit and we'd watch him, help him, think about the next day. And somewhere in there, my husband visited me, because I was pregnant and had a baby 9 months later, 10 months later. And I don't remember that. I'm just sharing. We're not perfect. But somehow in all that grief, there he was. Those men. So I had the worst guilt all the way through that pregnancy with my son. Because, of course, I'm thinking he's not going to have a brain. He's not going to live. He's not going to be able to learn. He's not going to be able to live life. And I remember the first time I got the ultrasound, I looked right for the brain, right? Oh, good. He's got a spinal cord. He's got a brain. And then I remember watching him like a hawk. I did not relax until he could count to 100 in kindergarten. With the other kids his age, I'm like, okay, he's okay. I'm off the hook, you know. But we don't know. See, we don't know that factor either. So I had a colleague who was born in London, And she said, "Oh, that alcohol. My mom drank whatever, I don't know, some hard liquor every night in London. I'm fine." And I kept looking like, I don't know, you're fine. But so you have kind of both sides with alcohol because sometimes you get lucky, right? So I think that that's something that we have to. That's the other problem is that, and I don't know the statistic offhand, but a large percentage of our pregnancies are under the haze of alcohol. Women really don't find out that they're pregnant until that third or fourth month. And so they were, and then they stop drinking. Well, you know, that's the epigenetic effect. So that's the effect that we're looking at. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So I put a slide in. We're just going to forget the slides at this point. We can't even see them, right? We're just going to talk. A little bit? Okay. I have a slide after I say thank you to you about, it's an area called expo-omics that is looking at the external environment. So the drugs you take that are prescribed or not prescribed. And most of us now have households with, mega bottles of ibuprofen from Costco, right? You can't just buy little bottle. We got to have a lot on hand, right? And it's become normative that instead of just kind of drinking water, getting rest, taking care of ourselves, we just live off the ibuprofen. So it's not even anxiety drugs, right? But that area is looking at pollution, looking at stress, looking at physical activity, looking at all of the other factors, pesticides, right, environmental pollutants, drugs, and how they feed into the impact on that SNP, on that gene. And that's just now being organized in something called genome-wide association studies. That's just now being organized in statistical models, just being thought about. I mean, the design of how they're studying that is amazing, and that's all computerized, right? That's all artificial intelligence looking at how to connect all of that information. But yes, absolutely, that's going to impact as much as diet. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the little piece of the internal environment of the diet, right? So there's all these other factors that impact that. Yeah. One of the challenges with my freshmen yesterday when I told them, did God really make us vegan? was I said, I'm not necessarily really opposed to pesticides. If they're ones that we can metabolize, because the pesticides protect us against things like a parasite, something that killed us 100 years ago. So we have to balance that discussion. It can't be all or nothing, right? It can't be all or nothing. And how do we, and that may be something protective. We don't know that, if it's protective or not. So I was sharing, and so they were sharing with me that almost every single one in that class had taken an aspirin or some sort of drug, and that does impact that impacts the full expression of your gene. Okay. I'm just going to go through these because we've. Oh, I don't have a favorite. I don't. They're all looking similar things. I mean, they're all looking at your SNP data. And you're asking is one more. The ones that I put up, MyHeritage, Ancestry.com, Habit, they're all very good companies. When you look at them, I've read through each of what they offer. Some offer more detail about your heritage than others. One of the cautions that I read about your heritage, the Ancestry, looking at, my husband for years told us we were an Italian family, not me, but my children. But he learned later that, no, it's actually Czechoslovakian. So I'm thinking, well, we probably really need to do that 23andMe because we have no idea what my children are, right? So, and I think it does give it to you as long as it's, 30, 40%. But when the percentages of variance get really small, I'm not sure how meaningful they are, right? Well, that's what they're saying. Statistically, they're saying they may say you're 1% or 2%. And then when I've looked at the comparative studies where they've looked at all these companies and different assays of how the different assays that are used by these companies, there's a wide variation. It's a 10 to 20% variation. So anything below about a 20% variance isn't going to give you a lot of information. And in fact, they showed different variances depending upon different assays chosen. And they showed, we all have Japanese in us. Every single one of us are 1% Japanese. Well, probably not, right? Because that's just because if they get anything over 0.01, they round it to 1%. So that's not valuable data. In fact, we don't regulate this at this point, but if we were to regulate, we'd probably say, don't publish anything below 30%. Don't mislead people with that type of information if they don't understand that statistic and they don't understand how not valuable that information is. Don't publish it. Don't provide it to them. Right? Oh, okay. Okay, they had a whole bunch of yeah. Yes. No, 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 they don't. So some are just looking at your heritage, your ethnicity, and others will do both. So no, they're not. Each company has a different focus. Yeah, yeah. They're not the same. Yeah, they don't provide exactly the same information. And that's my point. Is you can now that you have that data, choose a couple other ones, and you'll get sort of similar results, but they're not identical. So we are not yet standardized with the methodology that these companies are using. So it's sort of like going to one doctor, right? One of my friends has a son with a kidney condition, and he has to take a chemo drug. And I said, you probably need to get a second opinion on that, right? And I said, maybe even outside of Southern California, because maybe they're all thinking the same, because they've all been trained by the same brilliant kidney people. Go to Chicago or go to Boston. Well, when those other doctors confirmed that that was the same chemo drug that they would recommend, then okay, then you kind of feel with a heavy heart, okay, this is the best option for that person. So I think you do need to have multiple sites. I wouldn't call one the best. Not right now. There's a lot of competition. All right, I'm going to tell you, yes. Spain. Well, and the food from the Basque region is slightly different than Portugal and Spain. Mhm. 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 That's fabulous. Again, self-awareness with some data, right? She used some information and helped herself, right? Because she didn't believe in the overall population. Right. But knowing exactly the region, right? Then she knows exactly her genetic or part of it, depending upon what's gone on in the genetics. But she may be the one with 10 million right, that are expressing themselves. That's really a neat story. That's wonderful. Yep. I'm going to tell you one kind of interesting research, the binge eating research, and then I'm going to have you take a survey. So a study was just published, and this is an animal model. This is a mouse model, so it's not human, but it is fascinating. And it comes out of the Salk, no, not Salk. I'm not going to think of it. It's a European institute. But it's in cell metabolism. It's really, and it was like 15 different institutions working on it. It's just irrefutable. So they looked at pregnant female mouse, and when she was in her skyrocket. So her entire third semester was stressed. And which happens a lot, right? I know. And then they followed through on her offspring. And they found that the offspring would binge eat. They would overeat, binge eating. They would overeat. No, they did look at the fathers, right? Yeah, they did look at the fathers. Yeah. So this was specific, and they controlled for that. And they learned that binge eating was because of a folic acid deficiency. And when they fed methyl diet, mostly folic acid, the binge eating disappeared. They prevented it. That's an amazing connection. And typically, our adolescents, if they're thinking bars are good for them, right? We have an epidemic, right, of eating disorder. We have an epidemic of obesity going on in our adolescent age. And so that's a fascinating bit of information of why they need to eat their broccoli and their spinach. So I didn't finish. Folic acid is in dark green vegetables. Yeah. So, meats and things like that. Okay. So we're gonna do a survey, and I want to differentiate two things. I want to differentiate what is a genotype and what is a phenotype. Have you heard those? A genotype and a phenotype. So when I talk about the SNP data, we're talking about a phenotype. So we're talking about something that we can see, that we can describe, and a change that happens. That's a phenotype. So right now, my phenotype is I have green eyes and brown hair. It's actually from a bottle right now, but when I was a child, it was brown. But my phenotype is brown hair when I was young. So, and those come from an expression of my genes, right? So you have phenotypic expression from your genes. So the survey that I'm going to give you right now is to see some of the traits that you have that are phenotypic expressions of your genes that you have just based on your family heritage. So I'm going to pass this out, and I want you to answer it, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about it. So I had a glance at many of the tables, and I was pleasantly surprised that there were some yeses. Was it kind of fun to see if you had some people showed me their hitchhiker thumb? I'm someone who has the Morton's toe, so I really don't get the pedicure very often because it's like, whoa, that's a big toe, right? Well, not my most attractive feature. Anybody have the mid-digital hair? Yeah, my daughter goes, I think so. I see two hairs right there, on there. That's an interesting one. So how about, this is the clasp. Let me show you. You have to kind of naturally just clasp your hand. Right? Clasp your hand. Right, left over right. And so it's really normal. The left over right is very normal. Not normal. I should use normal. It's very common trait. It's a very common trait. Left over. Did anybody have right? Oh, okay. So it's interesting. So that's not So that's the kind of change that we want to see with the diet. So that's why I wanted to bring this up. It's kind of fun. You can try this on your family and friends. I gave the survey to the office yesterday, and none of them had a single trait. I'm like, oh no, what if I bring in? Nobody has a trait. It won't be helpful. So I'm going to conclude and just say thank you. You are an amazing audience. I've had several people who want to take nutrition now, and I'd be more than willing to offer an evening nutrition class. And you could come to Pepperdine and we could learn nutrition together. Nothing more I like. I feel like I have my best job in the world. I get to stand up and talk about something I really like to talk about. So, but I'd be more than happy to host you at Pepperdine for evening nutrition classes. We can set that up. That'd be fun. Thank you. And I think we have, if you have questions and questions, you have to use the mic because they're recording and they need to hear your question. Okay? So thank you very much for hosting me.
How do we find the percentage of our snippets?
How do you find the percentage of snippets? You're going to have to get that through the company data. Yes. Yes.
My question is, does the study of this reflect why there is contrasting studies? Like you'll read that a plant-based diet will lead to, increase this condition or that condition. But then it seems like there's contrasting studies. Is it because the sample size is...
I think it's because the SNPs on those genes of the individuals that are getting a change on a plant-based diet are different or responding differently or expressing differently than the SNPs on the other person.
So it's more about the sample than about the actual...
It's more about that individual's single change that gets expressed. Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about autism and how it fits into the genetic?
That's not even in my area. But I have a cousin, I have a family member who, Jack, every year she sends a Christmas card where they're crying in the bathtub. No, every year she shows like family. Instead of like a happy photo, she always shows the boys fighting, Jack and Mason. Mason is now, he's about 12. But I remember when he was diagnosed, it was around age 3 or 4. And she jumped on it. And I'm trying to remember, she followed a diet, and it was from somebody from TV. I can't remember the diet now that I'm trying to remember what the diet was, but it seems to have helped him because he tracks. So my guess is every autistic child has a different genetic, because you get 50% of your DNA from mom, 50% from dad. Every autistic child has a unique genetic genome, and they have unique, they may share, see, this is where Silverberry Genomics is looking at, where's that cluster of autism? Where's that cluster of kidney disease? Where's that cluster of heart disease? Because there may be a pattern within mom and dad's genome.
I wanted to share and support what you were saying about nutrition. My husband was 15 pounds overweight. He had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, and we went to a raw vegan clinic for 2 weeks, and he was on the statin, the metformin, the whole bit, and he was able to lose 15 pounds and then get off all of his meds. And his fast heart rate and everything, the labs went down when we went to his doctor, and the doctor was amazed. So I just wanted to say that your premise that nutrition plays a big role, I think, proved that. And my husband was not, he didn't really want to go, and it wasn't easy to be raw vegan for 2 weeks, but he did it and saw the results. So now we're not going to give up our wine, and we're not going to give up, meat and fish and certain things, but everything in moderation now.
Right.
So.
Well, we did have Colin Campbell. How many of you know Colin Campbell in the China diet? Anybody? So he was my biochem professor at Cornell. And he was really lucky. And we had him out at Pepperdine a couple years ago, and he addressed the plant-based diet, and he brought a lot of individuals that had been overweight, obese, with diabetes, followed his plant-based diet, no more drugs, no more diabetes, case after case after case after case. So again, I think that is that phenotype expression. So the other study I was going to tell you about today is a human study that was published in February, and they looked at beta islet cells in the pancreas and how they responded to high and low carbohydrate. And by lowering the carbohydrate, it did change the expression of those beta islet cells. And so it did prevent the type 2 diabetes. So I do think that we're getting closer and closer with each disease as we start connecting all of these pieces. The best explanation someone said about this area, and I'll end with this too, is, imagine you have a drawer with, 10,000 puzzle pieces from 8, some of us have that drawer, from all the puzzles, and you're trying to put them together. That's really what this is all about. It's all these puzzle pieces from all these different areas you're trying to make sense out of that are doing the same thing in some people and not in others. So.
You had mentioned that the folic acid thing in...
It's now your favorite vitamin,
It is.
right?
I'm going out right now to get it. It also applied with Alzheimer's. But does that mean, is there a correlation now to say that if you change your nutrition to have a higher level of folic acid, that would help you not get Alzheimer's, or are you already predisposed to get it and there's not much you could do? I'm very afraid.
Yeah. That area, so I'm not a medical doctor, so, and I'm not an Alzheimer's, and I'm not a neuroscientist. I work with a neuroscientist. I'm the nutritionist in the picture. But I will tell you that there is 15 years worth of data in the individual over the age of 65. When they are folic acid deficient, they have problems with learning and memory. And when you add that folic acid back, it improves or stays the same. It doesn't get progressively worse. So that's more dementia, the cognitive dementia, and not the Alzheimer's. And my mom, about 4 years ago, she now has about a 30-minute memory. We think it's because she had 10 pregnancies, 7 live. I think she didn't have folic acid probably for about 12 years of her life, because no one else in our family is presented with dementia on both sides of the family. And the folic acid seems to keep her stable across the board. So there is a lot of evidence for that, but not if you take folic acid would it prevent Alzheimer's. But that is what we're going after. So the mechanism, my current experiment right now that I'm in the midst of, it's ending it's ending right now as I speak. We're actually looking at these locus cells in the brainstem, and those are the ones that filter out the information for Alzheimer's. So that's the model for Alzheimer's. And so we're looking at the effect of folic acid on those right now. A lot of people are looking at it. But there's no answer for that. Can you take folic acid? So someone else, who was the person? What's your name? Julie was talking about just to differentiate the difference between folic acid and folate, because I didn't make that clear. Folate is the form of folic acid in food. So that's the vitamin. The water-soluble vitamin in food is folate. The supplemental form is folic acid. So researchers talk a lot about folic acid because folic acid can be titered. It can be measured and quantified, and so you can control it. So we use folic acid. So we talk about folic acid. They are slightly different. They're not the same. Folate and folic acid are slightly different. But when you consume folic acid, it turns into folate in your body in a 1-to-1 conversion. So they are synonymous with how your body uses it as folate. So the body uses folic acid as folate in the body. And there's a lot of lay literature, a lot of blogs, a lot of things talking about, don't take folic acid, you got to take folate. Well, it's impossible to take a folate supplement for everybody. It's very expensive. You'd have to take it from a whole food supplement, and we can't make those for everybody on the planet. So our prenatal supplements have folic acid because it's easier to make as a chemical, and that's one I would endorse. So that is that difference. So you'll hear that. If you go down to Pacific Coast Greens, they have good folate supplements that are whole foods. And if you can stick with whole food supplements, they are better than a chemical supplement.
Thank you.
Yes. You have to get the microphone.
I think we got such valuable information, and my question is, could you, along with Pepperdine, consider coming back at another time with the second half of the presentation? Because I'm not sure.
I know. I think I finished about 3/4 of it.
Yes, I
I'm
wanted
happy to
hear
come
all
back.
of it.
I am happy to come back. We can have part two nutrigenomics. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. My question is about mental health and what we eat. How does that affect? Because I've done a lot of reading on, for example, omega-3, fatty or fish oil and
Right.
things like that. How does what we eat affect our mental health?
Off topic, right? Well, not really. It's still a neuroscience type of topic. The best example that I can give you is my best friend. I grew up, as I told you, in Northern California. They had a houseboat up by Lake Oroville, on Lake Oroville. And I, every summer, would go up with them for a week. Could not wait. And they'd water ski. I didn't water ski. I just sit on the houseboat and swim. And they would go with a couple other families. And the food they had were things like Cheetos. Really, I loved going because it was everything I couldn't get at home. Cheesy bacon casseroles in the morning, just like Coca-Cola, like all the forbidden foods from home were on this houseboat. And I literally every summer got sick by the time I got home. And I got really irritable, grouchy. My personality sort of changed by the time I was at the end of that houseboat. And I just give you that as an example because I do think there is a direct interaction with food and your mental health, what you put in it.
It's a chemist, and he could determine from your blood type, certain type of thing of your blood type, what kind of personality you had. And he was saying that on the past, when we were not all connected like that, each diet were more secular, and the personality of the person were different. So if you are looking in Europe, the whole Europe, the Italians were known as very spiky, and then from the tomato sauce, but then to compensate on their diet, they were putting the pizza, which was the carb. And so he was looking at every different, now we are all mixed. And he was saying the American has a screwed up because we have diet from
Because
everywhere.
of our mixed genetics. We are not homogeneic.
That's what he was saying. He said we are like crazy. But the French, because of the cheese, were a certain way, and then the spice. But it was very interesting. So the diet do influence how you think, how you feel, and how you express it. So, and then you can therefore...
Yeah, I would second that. Yeah, I would second that. It's valuable. Yeah. Any other questions? Probably need to eat, right? Thank you.